Have you ever been told to just let it go or feel like you need to let things go? If that sounds familiar, then this podcast is for you. Be sure to listen.
Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things and move from being other-led to being self-led so you can live a life you love. Welcome to the Self-Led Woman Podcast. Let it go is the worst advice you could follow for dealing with the underlying causes of the stress that you face. I understand why you might think letting it go is what we're supposed to do. For years, especially growing up, we were told to just brush it off. You're okay, let it go. You're okay, let it go. Right? And a simple Google search on letting it go floods the screen with all the things that you should be just letting go of, reinforcing those early messages. And I'm pretty sure that your intention for wanting to let it go is that you're just trying to move on and feel better. But the problem is, if you don't actively address the underlying stressors causing or contributing to the stress that you face, those stressors tend to build up and often come out in full force at the most inconvenient times. It's like putting a bunch of meat scraps in the trash, but then never actually taking out the garbage. Sure, you let them go by putting them in the trash can, but they're actually still with you until you address them by taking out the garbage. Eventually, they start to stink, and the smell moves through your entire house. But the thing is there's actually a way you can make that smell go away. And it's by taking out the trash, right? Similarly, there's a way that you can deal with the underlying stressors causing or contributing to the stress that you face in ways that won't stink up your life. So the question is how do you do it? Well, first, before we get to that, when we're faced with stressors that are causing or contributing to our stress, we need to first consider, is this stressor within my control or outside of my control? This key piece will help us determine which skills we can apply to the situation. So I'm about to share how we can figure this out. So here's what most people do. Most people think that they have control over way more things that they have control over, and then spend a lot of time and energy trying to control them, those things that they can't change, and also upset that they can't control or change things that they think they should. And the problem is when you spend a lot of time and energy on trying to control something that's outside of your control, you'll find that things don't actually change. And then you'll end up feeling increasingly more upset and frustrated. It doesn't have to be this way. The good news is that there's a way to clarify what is within your control and what is outside of your control and how to address these underlying stressors that you face. So here's the deal. There are 6 main things that you can control. They are your mindset, your focus, your choices, your behavior, your actions, and your effort. And so brief consideration of that list shows you that what is in your control is really things related to how you show up in the world. You may have noticed that what's not on that list is how other people show up in the world, what they think, how they perceive us, what they feel, what they do, their behavior, their effort, just to name a few. So this is why you can spend an exorbitant amount of time and energy trying to change things that are outside of your control, see little to no change, and then end up feeling frustrated. It's just not an effective use of your limited time and energy, and it doesn't work. So now that you see the importance of clarifying what is within your control and what is outside of your control, I'm about to share one way that you can address the underlying stressors that you face. There's actually 3 methods I teach for addressing stressors that are within your control. But since dealing with stressors outside of our control tends to be the bigger struggle, I'm going to share one of 2 important ways that we can address stressors that are outside of our control. The mistake most people make is they don't actually have an effective way for addressing stressors that are outside of their control. They may vent about it and gain a lot or try to just let it go, but neither of those work. And then we're back to the whole stinky trash thing. So, to address underlying stressors that are outside of your control, you need to be intentional. One way to do this is with radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is a practice where we accept the reality of the situation as it is. We say to ourselves, this is the reality, and that's just how it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that you like or agree with the situation or that you have accepted this as your fate for the rest of your life. But instead, radical acceptance is naming the reality of the situation, accepting that this is indeed the current reality, working through any feelings that come up about that. And then after that, you can focus your time and energy on what you can do around the situation. It's really a way of taking back your personal power. The thing about radical acceptance is it's not a one-time thing. It's not like I tried that once and it didn't work. It's something that takes repetition and practice. And as you practice it over time, what you'll notice is it becomes easier and that it really resonates on a much deeper level that, oh yeah, you know what? This just isn't in my control. So I'm not going to dump a bunch of energy into it. I'm going to work through the feelings and then focus on what I can do. And so that important step is that last step, right? We can work through the feelings and then we do need to use that energy to focus on what we can do to address the underlying cause of our stress. And so what does this mean? So I'll share a couple of examples. One, when I worked in community mental health, I had a very, very large caseload, back-to-back clients with very little breaks. And I probably spent the better part of a year, maybe a year and a half, like pissed as heck, right? Like complaining, venting, howling at the moon about it. And it didn't really change anything because the fact of the matter is my caseload was out of my control because I worked for an agency that dictated my caseload. And so once I remembered, like, hey, let's focus on what we can control, I was able to say, you know what, the reality of working at this place is that I'm going to have a very high caseload and I'm not going to get to change it. And so I let myself work through those feelings. And then once I did, I had the energy to figure out, like, okay, what can I do? I can get a different job, which I eventually did. But in the short term, it was like, okay, if I'm going to be here, I have to find a way to show up authentically as myself, serving my patients in a way that aligns with my values, but also like coping with it, right? And so I spent energy on creating a safe space in my office, like almost this like little oasis, if you will, of just peace and calm that kind of helped me, right? And I found other little ways to deal with the stress along the way in that situation. Maybe a lighter example that perhaps is a little more relatable is if you live in Minnesota like I do, or a climate that gets a crap ton of snow or very cold weather, radical acceptance is pretty important. You can spend the entire winter and years of it miserable and just complaining about it and venting about it and just hating it. Or you can work through those feelings of like, yeah, it's not as warm as I like it here, but you know what? I like living here in general. And so I'm going to focus my energy on what I can do. And so for me, when I moved back to Minnesota after living in Colorado, which has a much milder, much milder climate, at least compared to Minnesota, I was like, okay, I can be upset about this and fight it every year like I was doing, or I can buy some snow pants and a parka that's a little warmer and goes past my knees. That way my walk to work isn't miserable. And, it's like, oh, okay, this isn't so bad, right? I started to go on winter hikes with a friend and just bundling up, wearing long underwear more. I even tried to do skate skiing, trying to get into some of those outdoor sports. That was actually a one-time experience for me, but it was something to do outside, kind of embracing the winter. And it doesn't mean that I necessarily enjoy the cold, but it's just accepting that, oh, this is a time where I need to bundle up more, make better clothing choices, and then enjoy hunkering down and snuggling in on those really cold days, making sure I always have at least one book available. And so this isn't a looking on the bright side kind of thing. It's not oh, I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons. What it really is it's about choosing our focus. we can focus on something that we can't control and get really frustrated and spin our wheel. Or we can accept that, you know what, it's cold in Minnesota. If I'm going to choose to live here, I can find a way to cope with it and make it like maybe even a little enjoyable, right? So you use the energy that you would have spent being mad on what you can do instead. And so the question is do you want to keep howling at the moon about those things that are outside of your control? And believe me, I get the draw there. I've spent many a year doing that. Or are you ready to focus the limited energy that you have in a day on what you can do? And if the latter is true for you, I want to invite you just for a moment to pause and think about how can you personally remind yourself to practice radical acceptance. Do you need a sticky note somewhere where you usually tend to get into these battles about things that are outside of your control or something like that? And while you're thinking about that, follow the Self-Led Woman podcast on Spotify, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel to watch the live video. So it's been fun being here with you. Thanks for listening. Take care.